आज स्टार्ट करना है रिवाइज़ करना कंप्लीट रशियन रेवोल्यूशन, ठीक है। इससे लास्ट वीडियो हमारी आई है जर्मन रेवोल्यूशन पे, राइट। ओके, लेट्स सी कितना होता है। व्हाट वर द कॉजेज एंड आउटकम्स ऑफ द 1905 रेवोल्यूशन अप टू 1914। सही। ओके, वो तो सारा 1800s का दौर है, ऐसे ही है, ये 1900s का दौर है। ओके, बैकग्राउंड। रशिया अंडर निकोलस टू, ठीक है। बाय द लेट 1800s रशिया वाज द लार्जेस्ट स्टेट इन यूरोप, अबाउट 123 million kilometers square, with a population of around 130 million. Compared to Britain, France, Germany, Russia was economically underdeveloped. There was a huge gap between rich and poor. ज़ार निकोलस टू उसने रूल किया है 1894 से 1917 तक, ठीक है। और was an autocrat, had unlimited power. He was a Romanov and strongly opposed reforms, so inequalities stayed unresolved. कब से कब तक उसने किया? 1894 से 1917 तक, ठीक हो गया। और लार्जेस्ट वो है स्टेट है यूरोप की, और 123 किलोमीटर 123 मिलियन किलोमीटर स्क्वायर उसका मतलब मुरबा किलोमीटर उनकी ज़मीन है, और पॉपुलेशन 130 मिलियन है, तो बहुत ज़्यादा ही है। और पूरा नाम क्या है? ज़ार निकोलस टू, 1894 से 1917। ओके, लिखा हुआ है प्रेशर्स फॉर चेंज इन द ज़ारिस्ट रिजीम, ठीक है। तो ये हमारा 1905 का रेवोल्यूशन से 1914 तक का टाइम लाइन हम कवर करने लगे हैं। अच्छा, प्रेशर्स फॉर चेंज इन द ज़ारिस्ट रिजीम अ मल्टी रेशियल मल्टी फेथ एम्पायर था। ओनली अबाउट 45% ऑफ द पॉपुलेशन वर इथनिक रशियंस, ठीक है। मैनी अदर ग्रुप्स लिव्ड इन द एम्पायर, आर्मेनियंस, Germans, Georgians, Poles, Ukrainians, and various Asian peoples. These groups were the proud of their nationality, language, history, and religion. In the 1890s, the regime pushed Russification, enforcing the Russian language, spreading Orthodox Christianity and its laws. By 1905, nearly 70% followed Orthodoxy but were still major Catholic, Muslims, and Jewish minorities. ठीक है। Okay, आगे Jews around 5 million faced persecution and were blamed for Russia's problems. They suffered periodic pogroms. Many fled to Western Europe. Many who stayed were pushed towards revolutionary activity. ठीक है। तो बेसिकली क्या था कि मल्टी रेशियल मल्टी फेथ एम्पायर था। देखें कि 45% पॉपुलेशन तो खाली इथनिकली रशियंस थी, और बाकी 55% आर्मेनियंस, जर्मन्स, जॉर्जियंस, पोल्स, यूक्रेनियंस, एशियन पीपल थे। और क्या था उनकी? दीज ग्रुप वर प्राउड ऑफ देयर नेशनैलिटी, लैंग्वेज, हिस्ट्री एंड रिलीजन। और 1890s के अंदर रूसीफिकेशन होती है। अभी रूसीफिकेशन क्या थी? इन्फोर्सिंग रशियन लैंग्वेज, स्प्रेडिंग ऑर्थोडॉक्स क्रिश्चियनिटी एंड इट्स लॉज, ठीक है। तो ऑर्थोडॉक्स क्रिश्चियनिटी को वो ना पुश करते थे और इन्फोर्स करते थे रशियन लैंग्वेज। बाय 1905 नियरली 70% फॉलोड ऑर्थोडॉक्सी, बट वर स्टिल मेजर कैथलिक, मुस्लिम्स एंड जूइश माइनॉरिटीज़। और ज्यूज़ को कत्ल करते थे। अराउंड 5 मिलियन ने प्रोसिक्यूशन फेस की थी, जो एक हिस्ट्री की ज़ुबान में कहते हैं पोग्रोम्स, ठीक है। और उसकी वजह से क्या हुआ था कि मैनी फ्लेड टू वेस्टर्न यूरोप एंड मैनी हु स्टेड वर पुश टूवर्ड्स रेवोल्यूशनरी एक्टिविटी। आगे है द सोशल हियार्की इन रशिया। क्या थी द सोशल हियार्की इन रशिया? द ज़ार रिलाइड ऑन द लैंड ओनिंग एरिस्टोक्रेसी, ठीक है। द सोशल हियार्की ऑफ रशिया हम चेक करने लगे हैं। द ज़ार रिलाइड ऑन लैंड ओनिंग एरिस्टोक्रेसी, अनलाइक वेस्टर्न यूरोप द नोबिलिटी डिड नॉट लिमिट टू चेक द मोनार्क्स पावर। Many elites depended on the state through military and civil service. Russia had few independent institutions. The Orthodox Church had major influence, especially in rural areas, and its leaders were appointed by the Tsar. आगे आता है peasants, the majority of the Russians. Most Russians were peasants. Even though the serfs were freed in 1861, emancipation of the serfs, little changed in practice. Peasants lived in communes that distributed lands. ठीक है, उसे कहते थे मिर्स। दे हैड टू पे रिडम्पशन पेमेंट्स फॉर द लैंड, ठीक है। मैनी पीजेंट्स वर लॉयल टू जार बट डिसलाइक ऑफिशल्स हु डिमांडेड टैक्सेस एंड फोर्स्ड सर्विसेज, ठीक है। तो ये लाइन फोकस करें। मैनी जो पीजेंट्स थे वर लॉयल टू जार बट डिसलाइक्ड ऑफिशल्स हु डिमांडेड टैक्सेस एंड फोर्स्ड सर्विस, तो यानी वो अलग अलग ट्रीट करते थे इन सारों ऑफिसर्स को, जार को, ठीक है। तो ये इंपॉर्टेंट है कि पीजेंट, क्योंकि मार्क्स स्कीम में आता है पीजेंट्स कहाँ रहते थे? मिर्स में, क्यूम्यून्स में, ठीक है। और ये आगे से डिस्ट्रीब्यूट करते थे लैंड। गॉट इट? ओके, ठीक है। आगे पीजेंट प्रॉब्लम्स, मेजर कॉज ऑफ अनरेस्ट, फ्रीक्वेंट फेमन्स थी, Poor transport meant food couldn't be moved easily to areas and land, widespread poverty and low production. The government encouraged migration to Siberia, land available but conditions harsh. In 1882, Land Bank created to help communities peasant buy land. By 1905, redemption payments were cancelled, but it didn't really improve peasant life much. Got it? Ex- ओके, आगे क्या है जी? रूलिंग क्लास की क्या पॉपुलेशन थी? 0.5, तो यानी छोटी सी एक माइनॉरिटी जो थी ना, वो कंट्रोल करती थी एक बिग एरिया। सही। आगे आगे है इकोनॉमिक स्ट्रक्चर, वाई रशिया वाज अनस्टेबल। क्या है? इकोनॉमिक स्ट्रक्चर के ऊपर हम बात करने लगे। एग्रीकल्चर प्लस फूड, रशिया should have been able to feed itself, but the economy was held back because farming methods were underdeveloped. Peasant and landowners didn't modernize, so output stayed low. What exports and what, well, plus wheat exports the plus unfair system. The Russia exported wheat by late 1800s. Its grain exports were second only to America, but peasants didn't benefit from the profits. The government, run mainly by the landowners, avoided taxing the ruling elite fairly. Instead, it relied heavily on indirect taxes, taxes on goods, food, which hurt peasants and on town workers most. आगे है रेलवेज प्लस इंडस्ट्री। बाय 1900 रशिया हैड कॉट अप विद द ब्रिटेन एंड जर्मनी इन टोटल रेलवे लेंथ। ठीक है, तो ये बहुत ज़्यादा मार्किंग स्कीम में फोकस इस पे किया जाएगा और पेपर के अंदर P1 के अंदर के वो ट्रेन का करेंगे डिफरेंस। दोबारा, बाय 1900 रशिया हैड कॉट अप विद द ब्रिटेन एंड जर्मनी इन टोटल रेलवे लेंथ्स। सही। बट बिकॉज रशिया वॉज ह्यूज, railways were still thinly spread, and so transport problems remained. Railways plus industry helped export more wheat and boosted foreign trade, but wealth wasn't shared properly. Again, corruption plus spending priorities. Tax collection was insufficient and corrupt. Tax money often disappeared into officials' pocket. The regime spent heavily on army and police, but little on improving the economy. Nicholas too wasn't interested in modernization or reform, stayed committed to autocracy. Growing alienation from government plus landlords, even though many peasants still trusted the Tsar personally. Underdeveloped agriculture था, indirect taxes, corruption, modernization, ये keywords थे. आगे है the Tsar political system, how Russia was ruled. Autocracy plus no limits. Nicholas II became Tsar in 1894 and promised to keep autocracy like his father Alexander III. 1881 से 1894 तक उन्होंने हुकूमत की है. There was no parliament to limit his power. The Tsar appointed and dismissed ministers whenever he wanted. ठीक है. Repression plus support system. The army crushed violent unrests. The secret police Okharna watched dissidents using informers. सीक्रेट पुलिस का नाम था उखाड़ना, वॉच डिसिडेंट्स यूजिंग इन्फॉर्मर्स। ठीक है, जो क्लैश करते थे, प्रोटेस्ट टाइप करते थे। ठीक है, द ऑर्थोडॉक्स चर्च स्ट्रांगली सपोर्टेड द जार। द लीडिंग फिगर कॉन्स्टेंटीन पोपेडिनोस्ट, क्या था? पोपेडिनोस्टिव ट्रीटेड अदर रिलीजियस आइडियाज एज सबवर्सिव एंड अपोज्ड रिफॉर्मर्स। ठीक है, ओके। निकोलस टूज लीडरशिप वीकनेस, अर्ली इमेज पर भी खुडियाना ट्रेजेडी मई 1896। तो वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट इवेंट है। मई 1896 में खुडियाना ट्रेजेडी होती है, 1894 में आया था। ओवर 1300 क्रश्ड टू डेथ एंड अ सिमिलर नंबर इंजर्ड ड्यूरिंग कोरोनेशन फेस्टिविटीज़। ठीक हो गया। निकोलस अटेंडेड अ सेलिब्रेटरी बॉल द सेम इवनिंग, सीन एज इनसेंसिटिव एंड आउट ऑफ टच. Personal life. Loved his family. Son Alexei had homophilia and the succession seemed uncertain, added instability. As a ruler, could seem personally decent but was committed anti-Semite. Anti-Semite यानी जो थे ज्यू से नफरत खाता था। देखा नहीं था लाइक बाय कितनी 5 मिलियन ज्यूज को इन्होंने प्रोसिक्यूट किया था इन द नेम ऑफ प्रोग्राम्स, राइट? आइसोलेटेड एट कोर्ट, not interested in governing, preferred hunting to meetings. Easily influenced by courtiers who opposed reforms. Ministers often chosen for status, not ability. Officials competed for attentions, focused too much on small details and couldn't delegate, so bigger problems were neglected. आगे है वीक एंड कंफ्यूजिंग गवर्नमेंट स्ट्रक्चर। स्टेट कंट्रोल और सेनेट दो चीज़ें थी। स्टेट कंट्रोल में क्या थे, सीनियर एडवाइजर्स दे हैड नो रियल पावर, मोस्टली ओल्ड मैन टेंडेड टू टेल हिम व्हाट ही वांटेड टू हियर। आगे है स्टेट काउंसिल और आगे सेनेट वाज अपॉइंटेड टू मेन टू ओवरसी लॉ बट पावर्स वर अनक्लियर एंड कन्फ्यूजन नहीं थी रियल पावर। तो स्टेट काउंसिल जिसके अंदर सीनियर एडवाइजर्स थे और सेनेट थी। Local government Russia divided into 97 regions, too many with unclear responsibilities. आगे exempt force local councils created after 1861 after some local cell government in Russian areas. इन emancipation of Sas 1861 में जो हुई है उसके बाद exempt force बनी थी, ठीक है। आगे not used in many minority areas, ठीक है, could be overridden by governors anti-reform officials as expected. Cities towns were run by appointed not elected officials. Russia was run less efficiently than modern Western European states. ठीक हो गया। Zemd wards had been set up following the emancipation of Serbs in 1861. ब्रिटिश के रिफॉर्म आ गए, ठीक है। तो ये कब से कब तक रहा है, फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर रहा है 1892 से 1903 तक। इसका मतलब क्या है कि 1894 यानी अलेक्जेंडर थ्री था ना, ये अलेक्जेंडर टू था, अलेक्जेंडर थ्री था प्रॉब्लली, राइट। उसके बाद हाँ अलेक्जेंडर थ्री था। तो अलेक्जेंडर थ्री के दौर में ये विटी आया था, ठीक है, और 1903 तक रहा है। बिग आइडिया व्हाट विटी बिलीव्ड, रशिया वाज रिच इन रॉ मटेरियल्स बट लैक्ड फैक्ट्रीज प्लस रेलवेज टू मेक एंड एक्सपोर्ट मैन्युफैक्चर्ड गुड्स। टू मॉडर्नाइज्ड फास्ट रशिया नीडेड फॉरेन लोन्स एंड एक्सपोर्ट्स। टू मॉडर्नाइज्ड फास्ट रशिया नीडेड फॉरेन लोन्स चाहिए थे एंड फॉरेन लोन्स एंड एक्सपोर्ट्स। इंडस्ट्रियल growth was needed to compete with the West, strengthen the military. He believed the state should have capitalism and industrialization. He brought Western engineers and managers to advise the government. What Whitty actually did, raised taxes and borrowed money from abroad by offering high interest rates to investors, put tariffs on imports and to protect Russian industries. ठीक हो गया। Linked the ruble to the gold standard, so stabilized currency plus built investor confidence. Prioritized railway expansion, railway lines almost doubled। मेजर क्या था उसका प्रोजेक्ट, ट्रांस साइबेरियन रेलवे मॉस्को से व्लादिवोस्टोक तक, दो पार्ट्स प्लेड इनकम्प्लीट अर्ली ऑन। सही है। तो ये उसकी कुछ अचीवमेंट्स थी, आई वुड से कि एक बार फिर कर लेते हैं। रशिया वाज रिच इन मिनरल बट लैक्ड फैक्ट्रीज प्लस रेलवेज टू मेक एंड एक्सपोर्ट मैन्युफैक्चर्ड गुड्स। To modernize fast, Russia needed foreign loans and exports. Industrial growth was needed to compete with the West, strengthen the military. He believed the state should drive capitalism, industrialization. He brought Western engineers and managers to advise the government. Raised taxes and borrowed money from abroad by offering high interest rates to investors. Put tariffs on imports to protect Russian industries. Linked the ruble to the gold standard to stabilize currency plus build investor confidence. Prioritized railway expansion. Railway lines almost doubled। ट्रांस साइबेरियन रेलवे मॉस्को से व्लादिवोस्टोक तक जाती थी। सक्सेस है क्या, रैपिड इंडस्ट्रियल ग्रेड स्पर्ट, कोल प्रोडक्शन इन साउथर्न रशिया मोर देन ट्रिबल्ड। रशिया became fourth largest steel producer, second largest petroleum producer, industry and railway expanded, faster economic development in previously hard to reach areas। ठीक है, तो ऐसे इसको याद करें। उसके दौर को कहते हैं ग्रेट स्पर्ट, ठीक है। वो 1892 से 1903 तक रहा है। कोल प्रोडक्शन जो साउथर्न रशिया में थी वो ट्रेबल हो गई थी, 3 गुना इंक्रीज कर गई थी। अगेन कोल की प्रोडक्शन साउथर्न रशिया के अंदर ट्रेबल कर गई थी। रशिया बिकेम द फोर्थ लार्जेस्ट स्टील प्रोड्यूसर एंड सेकंड लार्जेस्ट पेट्रोलियम प्रोड्यूसर, ठीक है। साउथ ये रशिया है, उसके साउथ के अंदर आपके पास जो कोल की प्रोडक्शन थी वो क्या हो गई, 3 गुना इंक्रीज हो गई। रशिया बिकेम फोर्थ लार्जेस्ट स्टील प्रोड्यूसर और पेट्रोलियम का सेकंड लार्जेस्ट बन गया। तो क्या कहते हैं, 4 और याद रखें सेकंड, 3 के साथ कोल रख लें, 4 के साथ स्टील रख लें और सेकंड के साथ पेट्रोल रख लें। प्रॉब्लम्स, Heavy reliance on foreign loans, more money spent repaying loans than on education, about double. Higher taxes to repay loans hit peasants the hardest. Wealth wasn't shared fairly, living standard for most people declined, national debt was increased. आगे political reaction, why it didn't save the regime. Nicholas II gave little support. Witte was hated by many courtiers plus nobles. They feared rapid industrialization would destabilize rural society. He was also disliked for marrying divorced Jewish women, shows elite prejudice. After 1905, he was recalled briefly as prime minister mainly to secure a loan from France, then dismissed once it was done. आगे द राइज ऑफ ऑपोजिशन 1800 से 1905 तक. Notes. Liberals wanted constitutional political change plus more civil liberties like Western Europe. Base of support Zemst local councils. By 1904 they formed the Union of Liberation. ठीक है, तो ऐसे मैं इसको कर देता हूँ. Union of Liberation. Weak, supported mainly by the small middle class, didn't appeal to peasants. ठीक है, तो यूनियन लिबरेशंस, ठीक है, यूनियन ऑफ लिबरेशन 1904 में बनाई गई और ये काइंड ऑफ खाली सपोर्ट होती थी, ये काइंड ऑफ खाली सपोर्ट होती थी बाय दी मिडिल क्लास. पीजेंट सपोर्ट नहीं करते थे एंड देयर इज़ नो वे कि वो अपर क्लास सपोर्ट करें. ठीक है, नो ऑफिशियल लिबरल पार्टीज अंटिल 1905. क्लाइमेट बिकेम मोर ओपन. मेन लिबरल पार्टी 1905 में कैडेट्स बनी. wanted a reformed monarchy with limits on the Tsar's power. आगे why opposition became violent. Tsarist system was oppressive, so opposition was often forced underground. Critics had no legal way to express views, so turned to political violence. Seeing by the major observer, Russia was autocracy tempered by assassination. Autocracy are tempered by assassination. Major example, Tsar Alexander II assassinated March 1881 by the bomb throwers. This strongly affected Nicholas II. सही है. रशिया वॉज ऑटोक्रेसी टेम्पर्ड बाय असैसिनेशन. तो उस वक्त क्या होता था कि ऑटोक्रेसी को डील करना था ना, तो असैसिनेट करते थे. तो एग्जांपल दिए ज़ार अलेक्जेंडर टू की. रेडिकल ऑपोजिशन ग्रुप्स कौन कौन से थे. सोशलिस्ट रेवोल्यूशनरीज थे आपके पास, और आपके पास सोशल डेमोक्रेट्स थे. ठीक है, सब देखिए 1904 के अंदर या 19 कब के लिए 1904 के अंदर यूनियन ऑफ लिबरेशन बनी है, 1905 के अंदर कैडेट्स बनी है. अब हम रेडिकल ऑपोजिशन ग्रुप्स पढ़ने लगे. सोशलिस्ट रेवोल्यूशनरीज क्या थे. फाउंडेड 1901, confiscate and redistribute land to peasants, had a terrorist wing that carried out assassination before 1905, assassination of interior minister Vyacheslav von Pahlavi. आगे है सोशल डेमोक्रेट्स, ऑल रशियन सोशल डेमोक्रेट लेबर पार्टी. ये बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट है. सोशल डेमोक्रेट्स क्या है. ऑल रशियन सोशल डेमोक्रेटिक लेबर पार्टी. ऑल रशियन social democratic labor party founded in 1898, seen as the most important long term opposition based on Karl Marx idea. History shaped by economic forces. Capitalism replaced feudalism, ठीक है, and empowered the bourgeois. Revolution by the proletariat to overthrow capitalism. Dictatorship of the proletariat would lead to classless society. Borders operation would disappear. तो सोशलिज्म की तरफ मूव करेंगे कि फ्यूडलिज्म है, कैपिटलिज्म आया, कैपिटलिज्म के अगेंस्ट के प्रोलेटरिएट यानी डिक्टेटरशिप ऑफ द प्रोलेटरिएट, क्लासलेस सोसाइटी. स्प्लिट इन मार्क्सिस्ट व्यू में दो थे, प्लेखनोव वर्सेस लेनिन, एंड 1903 के अंदर स्प्लिट आता है. अर्ली लीडर, ठीक है. अभी इस पॉइंट तक आपके पास दो चीज़ें आ गई, सोशल डेमोक्रेट्स, ठीक है, और सोशलिस्ट रेवोल्यूशनरीज. सही. और सोशल डेमोक्रेट्स 1898 में बने. ठीक, डेट्स याद करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है सच. अच्छा आगे आगे अर्ली लीडर जॉर्ज प्लेखनोव वांटेड अ ब्रॉड अलायंस ऑफ प्रो रिफॉर्म एंटी ज़ारिस्ट एक्टिविटीज़. वो कहता था एक बड़ा ग्रुप होना चाहिए जो एक्चुअली एंटी ज़ारिस्ट एक्टिविटीज़ को सपोर्ट करे, लेकिन लेनिन का व्यू डिफरेंट था. Argued only a highly centralized, disciplined party would lead a revolution in an autocracy. At the 1903 London Congress, Lenin pushed to restrict membership to committed activities, a small minority. तो जॉर्ज प्लेखनॉफ कहता था कि प्रो अलायंस क्या होगी? अ ब्रॉड अलायंस ऑफ प्रो रिफॉर्म, अ ब्रॉड अलायंस ऑफ प्रो रिफॉर्म। लेनिन का व्यू क्या था? हाईली सेंट्रलाइज्ड डिसिप्लिन पार्टी। ठीक है, और 1903 लंदन प्रो कांग्रेस के अंदर लेनिन पुश करता है, रिस्ट्रिक्ट करता है कि आपके पास क्या हो? हाईली सेंट्रलाइज्ड डिसिप्लिन पार्टी हो। मार्टोव प्लस ट्रॉट्स्की's व्यू। Julius Markov and Leonid Trotsky disagreed, thought success needed a wider membership, believed capitalism would need to collapse from within before communism could win। ठीक है, डिसएग्री करते थे किस बात के ऊपर? थॉट सक्सेस नीडेड अ वाइडर मेंबरशिप, सही है, ज़्यादा लोग चाहिए। बिलीव्ड कैपिटलिज्म वुड नीड टू कोलैप्स फ्रॉम विद इन बिफोर कम्युनिज्म कुड विन। गॉट इट। आगे है आपके पास बोल्शेविक्स। अच्छा, एक चीज़ पूछनी थी इनसे मैंने, चैट जीपीटी से। हम्म, ठीक है। Party membership organization. Martov wanted a broad mass party. Trotsky didn't back Lenin's tight professional revolutionary model either, but he criticized Martov's split and pushed for unity between factions for years. He saw over centralization as dangerous, but he also thought the party still had to be effective, not just a loose club. Mart- uh, मार्टव कहता था ब्रॉड मेंबरशिप प्लस टू स्टेज रेवोल्यूशन, कैपिटलिज्म फर्स्ट। ट्रॉट्स्की क्या कहता था? वर्किंग क्लास लेड परमानेंट रेवोल्यूशन। एक मिनट। हम्म, यार इतना इंपॉर्टेंट कोई नहीं है, इतना छोड़ो, सही है। बट जूलियस मार्टव कहता था कि आपके पास ना कैपिटलिज्म पहले आएगा, ठीक है, और फिर वही पूरा प्रोसेस होगा, सही। और पहले फ्यूडलिज्म, फिर कैपिटलिज्म, फिर उसके अगेंस्ट प्रोटेस्ट्स, फिर डिक्टेटरशिप प्रोलेटरिएट की, और फिर कम्युनिज्म। लोइन ट्रॉट्स्की क्या कहता था? ये लिखा हुआ है, इट इज़ टू स्लो, ठीक है, और परमानेंट रेवोल्यूशन आइडियाज एज रेवोल्यूशन कुड कंटिन्यू इनटू सोशलिज्म विदाउट अ लॉन्ग कैपिटलिस्ट स्टेज। ठीक है, इसको चेक कर लेते हैं। हु वुड लीड द रेवोल्यूशन? मार्टव मैनशेविक क्या कहता था? बिलीव द bourgeois स्टेज हैड टू कम फर्स्ट, liberals plus worker socialism comes later. Trotsky believed the working class could lead immediately with support from peasants and could move straight from overthrowing the czar into socialist measures। सही आ गया, समझ आ गई। आगे बोल्शेविक्स वर्सेस मेंशेविक्स का नहीं है। वोट एट कांग्रेस वाज वेरी क्लोज, लेनिन साइड वन बाय 2 votes। ठीक है, बोल्शेविक्स मेजॉरिटी, मेंशेविक्स माइनॉरिटी। मार्टव साइड, ट्रॉट्स्की वाज विद देम एट दिस स्टेज, आफ्टर द स्प्लिट दे केप्ट सेपरेट ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस। सही है। एक मिनट। ओके, लेनिन क्या था? मिडिल क्लास बैकग्राउंड रखता था, सीन एज politically dangerous from age 17 after his brother was executed for a plot against Alexander III, exiled to Siberia, then lived in Western Europe, returned to Russia 2 months after February 1917, opposed the provincial government, played a decisive role in 1917, ruled Russia until 1924। Trotsky, a well to do Jewish family in Ukraine. Early on, Menshevik in 1905 organized workers in St. Petersburg, exiled but escaped abroad, joined Bolsheviks in 1917, key in taking power plus organizing the Red Army. After 19 lost power struggle with Stalin, expelled and exiled, assassinated in Mexico by Stalin agent. सही है. Okay. Hmm. The Tsarist system was strong and stable at beginning of 20th century. It faced serious threats. The Tsarist system could lead on the army, rely on the army and secret police to suppress opposition. Okhalna की बात कर रहे हैं. This had the effect of driving opposition underground, potentially making it more violent and dangerous. ठीक है. Autocracies यानी total control. Tsar dismissed ministers, no parliament to limit him. Orthodox charged back the Tsar and influenced peoples. Most peasants still believed in the Tsar as a person even if they hated local officials. British policies caused a great spurt. Industry plus railway expanded, which caused strengthened the state. Huge peasant misery. 82% peasants plus poverty, famines, low in output, resentment over taxes, potentially mass unrest. Rapid industrialization created worker unrest. Growing factory workflows plus bad conditions equal strikes and organized protests become easier. Nationalities plus religious tensions. Russification angered minorities. Jews faced pogroms, more alienation and resistance. Opposition becoming organized plus radical. Liberals, Union of Liberation Cadets plus radicals. Socialist revolutionaries and social democrats. Growing repression pushed them underground and violent assassinations. अब एक मज़े का टॉपिक आ जाता है द वॉर विद जापान. रूसो जापानीज वॉर एंड इट्स कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस फॉर रशिया. वाई वॉर हैपेंड. बाय 1900 चाइना वॉज वीक, so Russia and Japan both wanted to expand influence in Manchuria, eastern China and Korea. Russia wanted Port Arthur, Manchuria because it was an ice-free harbor because Russia's other ports were limited by ice or hard access. Japan suggested a deal. Russia gets Manchuria, Japan gets Korea, but talks collapsed. War began in 1904 after Japan attacked Port Arthur. Russian navy was weak. Ships were sent from Baltic Sea to fight Japan. They took 8 months to arrive. Russia suffered a massive defeat at the Battle of Tsushima in 1905 May. About two-thirds of the Russian fleet was destroyed. Huge loss plus low morale. Okay, two-thirds of the Russian fleet was destroyed. Huge loss plus low morale. Russian army was bigger than Japan's but lower quality. Failed to stop Japan taking Mukden, capital of Manchuria. Russia struggled to move troops because of the Trans-Siberian Railway wasn't fully complete. Russia accepted a humiliating peace treaty of Portsmouth arranged by the USA. Japan became the dominant power in Korea and Manchuria. सही हो गया. तो बैटल ऑफ सुशीमा हारे और ट्रीटी ऑफ पोर्ट्समouth. Japan's reputation rose, seen as modern and efficient first Asian power to defeat a European country. Russia's weaknesses were exposed internationally. Again, Russia's Russia's weaknesses were exposed internationally. Russia shifted focus from the east to Balkans, which helped create tensions leading to World War I. Inside Russia, defeat wrecked the prestige of the Tsarist government. The war became a major cause of 1901 revolution. आगे है causes of the 1905 revolution. Peasant anger. Life barely improved after emancipation. Still had redemption payments. Hit hardest by tax increases to fund British industrialization. Hated compulsory military service. Worker hardship plus recession. Economic recession. Unemployment rose. More migration to city. St. Petersburg and Moscow. Overcrowding. Workers lived in squalid housing, unhealthy environments, low education, very little medical care, no employment rights, trade union banned, police crushed, protest, real wages fell by 20%. Nationalist unrest. Groups like Finns, Baltic people, Armenians, Georgians resented Russification. Demands for democracy. Educated middle class wanted free democratic country, no legal political parties, but people still pushed for reform. Some demanded socialism. Autocracy plus repression. Nicholas II's autocratic rule alienated people. Reformers faced the police state repression. रूसो-जापानीज वॉर 1904 से 5, तो ट्रीटी ऑफ सुशिमा और ट्रीटी ऑफ द बैटल ऑफ सुशिमा एंड ट्रीटी ऑफ पोर्ट्समouth made the Tsarist government look incompetent and weak, encouraged liberals who wanted a reformed, more efficient monarchy. आगे है रोल ऑफ रेवोल्यूशनरीज ग्रुप्स डिड नॉट कॉज द रेवोल्यूशन डायरेक्टली. Bolshevik and Mensheviks were surprised, but once again Trotsky plus Mensheviks tried to encourage strikes and workers' action. Workers formed council called Soviets in factories. Again, ये इम्पोर्टेंट है, वर्कर्स जो थे उन्होंने काउंसल्स बना लिए थे फैक्ट्रीज़ के अंदर, और उस काउंसल्स को सोवियत कहते थे. लेनिन was in exile, returned 11 months after the Bloody Sunday, too late to lead 1905. ब्लडी संडे क्या था जनवरी 1905 में? व्हाट हैपेंड? फादर गैपमॉन led a peaceful non-violent march to Winter Palace in St. Petersburg to petition the Tsar for reforms including an elected assembly by universal suffrage, civil liberties, land reforms, fairer taxes, workers having a say in how the factories are run. The marchers were unarmed and not trying to start a revolution. The crowd was attacked violently by the Cossack soldiers, about 130 killed, hundreds injured. The event became known as Bloody Sunday. Why it mattered? Before this, many workers blamed the bureaucracy, the government officials, not the Tsar, but they called the Tsar their little father and thought he didn't know how badly they lived. Many even carried pictures of Nicholas too. After Bloody Cinder, people start blaming the Tsar himself even though he wasn't there. The violence shocked the country and triggered wider unrest, more strikes, protests, and uprising. From the petition of crowd on Bloody Sunday, January 1905, Sire, here many thousands of us and all are human beings only in appearance, in reality in us as in all Russian people, there is not recognized any human right, not even the right of speaking, thinking, meeting, discussing, or needs. We have been enslaved under the auspices of your official. We are seeking here the last salvation. Do not refuse assistance to your people. Give their destiny into their own hands. Cast away from them the intolerable oppression of officials. Destroy the wall between yourself and your people and let them rule the country together with yourself. They addressed him respectfully as sire and asked for help, not his removal. They blame your officials, saying officials have enslaved, meaning they still see the Tsar as someone who could rescue them. They ask for basic rights, speaking, thinking, meeting, discussing need. What the language shows about their goal. The key line is basically let them rule the country together with yourself. Let them rule the country together with yourself. That's not revolution. It's a request for shared reforms like an elected assembly and civil freedoms while keeping the Tsar. Other disturbances 1905 worker unrest. Strikes plus Soviet strikes started in Moscow and spread into other cities. Around 8 lakh workers went on strike. Workers organized into trade unions. Workers Soviets formed in St. Petersburg and Moscow demanded better working conditions, became center for wider political agitation, political protest and political pressure. Military unrest. Sailors on the battleship Potemkin mutinied. Government feared unrest spreading to soldiers and sailors. ठीक है, तो ये इम्पोर्टेंट है, ये तो बार बार मार्किंग स्कीम में भी आता है. मिलिट्री अनरेस्ट था. सेलर्स ऑन द बैटलशिप पोटेमकिन म्यूटनीड. जो आर्मी के लोग थे बैटलशिप पे, उन्होंने गवर्नमेंट के अगेंस्ट चले गए. तो गवर्नमेंट फीड अनरेस्ट स्प्रेडिंग टू सोल्जर्स एंड सेलर्स. तो ये इंपॉर्टेंट लाइन है. सेलर्स जो थे ऑन द बैटलशिप पोटेमकिन म्यूटनीड. लिबरल मिडिल क्लास प्रेशर. Cadets, constitutional democrats wanted the Tsar's power limited by an elected assembly. They tried to create a union of middle class groups plus workers plus peasants to demand more political change. Peasant unrest. Peasants refused to pay rent, attacked aristocratic property, and burnt about 3,000 manors in summer 1905. Why the Tsar survived? Revolutionaries were disorganized and no central coordination. Protests were spread across the empire, hard to unify. Only a few committed revolutionaries were deeply involved. Crucially, the army stayed loyal to the Tsar at this stage. ठीक है, तो ये उसको गोलियाँ शोलियाँ मारे. Partially reliable but limited. A painting can show the general reality, shooting, chaos, fear, venting palettes, but it's not a neutral photograph. Artist chose what to include to make a passage. Chose how Bloody Sunday was remembered, workers as victims, state forces as threatening, give a sense of mood, panic, violence, and a setting, snow, place, area, troops. Who shared first, exact number killed, exact positions, timing, whether the crowd was murdered. It may use dramatic composition, lots of bodies, clear good versus bad to persuade. What would you need to know to access it properly about the artist? Was the artist pro Tsar, anti Tsar, or later pro Soviet? Did they have reason to criticize the regime? Did they have a history of making propaganda? When what is painted? Was it commissioned? Who was the intended audience? Was the artist an eyewitness? Was there censorship pressure or political risk? Compare it with other sources. Okay, आगे आता अक्टूबर मैनिफेस्टो. Under continued, Nicholas II was reluctantly persuaded to make concession. He did so in the advice of Vete Nobium. Was the October Manifesto promised free speech, greater civil liberties, voting rights for groups previously excluded from politics, creation of an elected assembly, the Duma? The Duma's agreement would be needed before laws could be passed. Limited kept control. Duma could not choose ministers. Duma could not hold ministers accountable. Nicholas claimed the right to discharge the Duma. So it like constitutional reform, but the Tsar kept major power. Okay. So it looked like constitutional reform, but the Tsar kept major power. Reaction to manifesto. People who were satisfied. Many rebels felt their voices were heard. Moderate liberals became Octobrists and were pacified by the Duma, mostly from land owning plus business classes. They feared working class violence and wanted order restored. Peasant unrest was reduced in November when redemption payments were announced to be phased out. People who were not satisfied, a minority of extreme revolutionaries, including Bolsheviks, said it didn't go far enough. Some armed resistance continued, but the Tsar soldiers crushed it and ended the Soviets. Result, for a time it looked like a stability might return to Russia. फिर आ जाते हैं फंडामेंटल लॉस. ठीक है, तो बेसिकली ब्लडी संडे, अब अक्टूबर मैनिफेस्टो, अब फंडामेंटल लॉज आ रहे हैं. What they showed, Nicholas II's reforms from the October Manifesto were not sincere. In April 1906, he issued the Fundamentals Law to reconfirm his full autocratic power. तो अब वो कैंसिल कर दी इन्होंने. First statement, supreme autocratic power belongs to Tsar. This crushed hopes that the Duma would create a truly representative government. How the Tsar kept real control even with the Duma. The Tsar could introduce laws himself. Tsar could veto law passed by the Duma. The elected Duma was balanced by the state council, and most members were appointed by the Tsar. Ministers were still appointed by the Tsar. Tsar controlled military and foreign affairs. The Duma had no way to enforce its decision, weak in practice. Okay, again repression after 19th. Police and army continued to harass critics. Within about a year, estimate 15,000 killed and 70,000 arrested. 15,000 killed and 70,000 arrested. अच्छा, उसमें कितने थे? 130 किल हुए थे, 100 इंजर हुए थे, राइट? ओके, आगे. The fundamental laws. The initiative in all branches of the legislation belong to Tsar. Solely on his initiative may the fundamental laws of the empire be subjected to the revision in the Council of Empire and the Imperial Duma. The Tsar approves of the law, and without his approval no law come into existence. All fundamental power and the widest extent throughout the whole Russian are vested in the Tsar. October Manifesto made it seem like the Duma would share power, but the fundamental law weak and dependent on the Tsar. How would reformers react? Anger and disappointment. They would feel the Tsar tricked them and didn't need real power. Loss of trust in Nicholas II. Moderate reformers like Rebel would likely demand a truly constitutional monarchy, minister responsible to the Duma. Radical would use as a proof that peaceful reform doesn't work, argue for more revolutionary action. After 1905, what the reforms real? Some historians say Nicholas II missed a chance in 1806 to modernize Prussia. Nicholas II was a reactionary, anti-reform and autocratic, rarely gave up power. ठीक है, रिएक्शनरी क्या होता है? एंटी रिफॉर्म. Reforms were mostly cosmetic, looked good but didn't change much. Causes of the 1905 revolution stayed mostly unresolved. 1906 से 1914 तक क्या हुआ? निकोलस treated the Duma with the contempt and gave weak leadership set of future troubles. अब बारी आ जाती है स्टिलियोपन की. सही हो गया. Who was Stiliopon? Appointed by the Minister of Interior, then PM. Focused on agriculture, peasants is equals to main problem. His reforms complemented Witty's, but didn't work together. Some historians say if Nicholas had fully backed Witty and Stiliopon, revolution might have been avoided. Stiliopon, reform plus repression. Believed in strict law and order, crushed peasant unrest. Stoliopan's necktie hanging, used widely after 1905 uprising. He was not a democrat. Order first, then reforms. तो स्टोलियोसन नेकटाई जो रेवोल्यूशन आएगा उसको मार दो. स्टोलियोपन्स नेकटाई. रिफॉर्म गोल: create a wealthier peasant class. Colicus. Motto: bet on the strong. Property owning peasants would support the system and reject revolution. What problem did he try to fix? The mirs, the communes. Mirs controlled peasant life, land strips plus crops, which restricted ambitious peasants. Stoliopen wanted peasants to leave the mir and become independent owners. Let them combine strips into one form, more efficient farming. High redemption payments helped cause 1905 unrest. Land was expensive, countryside was overcrowded, and harvest were sometimes bad, conditions worse. Peasants feared the government would repossess land if they wouldn't pay. Peasant land bank lent money to the peasant to buy land, encouraged peasants with little land to move east to unfarmed land. ठीक है. साइबेरिया वगैरह. रिजल्ट वेरीड बाई रीजन. यूक्रेन और क्रीमिया के एरिया फर्टाइल थे तो स्ट्रॉन्ग इंसेंटिव टू ओन लैंड, प्रोडक्शन रोज, कोलैकस ग्रीव रिचर. और नॉर्थ और ईस्ट में क्या हुआ? लेस इंसेंटिव, बेनिफिट स्मॉलर. रिजल्ट्स: आउटपुट में हैव इंक्रीज बाय 14%. ठीक है. एग्रीकल्चर की इनकम ऑफ सम लैंड ओनर कोलैका रोज बाय 80%. But some historians argue growth was due to the natural growth harvest, not reforms. By 1906 to 14, only 15% of the peasant households had consolidated into farms. Just 15% have consolidated into farms. Strong resistance in central Russia, later a key revolutionary area in 1917. ठीक है. Many peasants were also suspicious and stayed in communes for security. Strong resistance in Central Asia. ठीक है. Stoliopan said he needed 20 years for full results, but he didn't get it. Stoliopan was assassinated at the Kyiv Opera. He was already losing the Tsarist favor. Some suspicion state agent may have been involved. Successors Kokostev and Gormaikin. ठीक है. 11 से 14 तक कोकोस्टिक रहा है और 14-16 गोरमाइकिन रहा है. Lacked his energy and commitment. Stoliopan had worked well with the Octobrists in the Duma. They supported him. Political objectives. आगे क्या है? Strengthen Russia by modernizing the economy. Mainly wanted a stronger state, not democracy. ठीक है. इनकी व्यूज़ क्या हैं? Political objectives दोनों के मिला के हैं. Strengthen Russia by modernizing the economy, industry. Wanted stronger state, not democracy. Favored reform enough to calm unrest. Advised October Manifesto but wasn't trying to end autocracy. Save the Tsarist system by restoring order first. वो Stoliopan's necktie, then reforms. Wanted a loyal ruler base, create wealthy peasants, collakas who could support the regime. Also not a democrat. Reforms were to stabilize autocracy, not replace it. Nature of the both wanted to strengthen Russia and protect the regime, not create full democracy. Wittis: foreign loans and high interest to attack investors, tariff to protect Russian industry, gold standard for the ruble, big railway, Trans-Siberian, fast industrial growth but higher taxes plus debt. Stoliopan crushed unrest. Stoliopan's necktie. Tried to break powers of the mirs. Peasant could own land privately. Encouraged consolidation of strips into farms. Used peasant land bank. ठीक हो गया. Wittis मतलब सही है ना. आगे रिलेशन विद जार. Never fully trusted by Nicholas to mobility. Used briefly in crisis, then dropped once useful. Stoliopan at first had Tsar's support because he restored order. Lost power, faced enemies at court, then assassinated. Level of success. Industry and railway grow fast, creates but created problems. Debt plus tax burden and living standards were added tensions to the open. Some agriculture improvements and rich could in fertile region. Only 15% of the household consolidated into farms by 1914. Need 20 years but didn't get it. Whitleys achieved faster short-term economic growth while Studeopen's agriculture was slower and incomplete, and both failed to remove the deeper causes of revolution. Let me see. First 2 months, second 2 months. हम्म, उम्मीद काफ़ी रहता है. ठीक है, मुझे 1 सेकंड देना. आगे बढ़ते हैं जी। फर्स्ट डूमा 1906, जी डूमास 1906 से 14 तक गए पिक्चर। डूमा was elected but not fully democratic and very limited in power. Nicholas II could often ignore it and he dissolved it when it challenged him. फर्स्ट डूमा जो थी 1906 में आई, ठीक है, तो मंथ्स याद करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है। ओके, फर्स्ट डूमा जो थी 1906 में आई, फ्रेंचाइज नॉट यूनिवर्सल, ओनली मैन ओवर 25 कुड वोट, वोटिंग वॉज इनडायरेक्ट, पीपल वोटेड फॉर इलेक्ट्रल कॉलेज and which chose Duma members. Duma's power limited mainly to a small part of the budget, weak influence. Social Democrat was social revolutionaries boycotted election. Cadets won good amount of seats, 153 over 448 seat, and demanded more power for the Duma. Tsar dissolved it after 2 months. Cadet met at Voiborg and urged people to refuse taxes, refuse military service. Resistance was scattered and crushed easily. ठीक है, तो 153/448 उन्होंने सीट्स जीती कैडेट्स ने, ठीक है, और वो वाइबॉर्ग में मिले और काइंड ऑफ ऑपरेशन शो की रेजिस्टेंस हो रही। ओके, सेकेंड डूमा जब हुई तो 1907 में कैडेट्स वीकेंड आफ्टर फेलियर, more radical parties, social democrats and social revolutionaries did well over 100 seats between them. Duma became deeply divided, land reform plus land and order. Tsar again feared it becoming an opposition forum, dissolved it. Nicholas still held elections partially to take more parliamentary to Britain and France. सही, ओके। ठीक है, थर्ड डूमा 7 से 12 तक गई। स्टोलियोपन चेंज द फ्रेंचाइज टू फेवर लैंड ओनर्स एंड अर्बन प्रॉपर्टी ओनर्स, ठीक। एक मिनट चेक करते हैं। ठीक 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 ठीक, सही है। दिस मेड डूमा मोर कंजर्वेटिव एंड लास्ट लॉन्गर। राइट विंग पार्टीज कंट्रोल 287/443 सीट्स हैं। रेशियल रिलेशनशिप विद द गवर्नमेंट मोर हारमोनी, सोसाइटी बात सारे लोग अपने बैठे हुए हैं। सम प्रोग्रेस, लैंड रिफॉर्म्स, मिलिट्री रीऑर्गेनाइजेशन, national insurance for workers. Radicals call it Dumas of the land and lackeys. Even liberal discredit how electoral law was manipulated. Fourth Duma 12 से 14 तक गया। The Duma was weakened because socialists and Octoberists argued and disagreed, so it couldn't work effectively. So it was suspended when the Cold War One started. World War One started August 1914. Okay, Soviet era historians said the third and fourth Duma were fake democracy. They were just a puppet controlled by the Tsar. Marxist writers believed the real progress only began after the Bolsheviks took power, so they dismissed earlier reforms. Mm, okay. The Duma did sometimes criticize the government and had some successes passing the law. They are more willing to see the Dumas as having some value, not totally useless. We can't know if the Duma could have become stronger if they had been given more time, but one thing is certain: as long as Tsar and minister controlled the electoral system, the Dumas could not gain real popular support for truly represent what Russian people wanted. The Duma could never become real democracy because Tsar controlled the rules over a judgment. The Duma failed to solve Russia's problem. As long as Tsar and ministers controlled the electoral system, powers of the Duma couldn't gain real support or present what most. ठीक है, ये इसकी ज़रूरत नहीं है, मैंने इसको लास्ट में डिलीट करना था, नहीं करता क्योंकि पिक्चर्स वगैरह लगाई हुई है तो मसला होता है, वो ऊपर चली जाती है फिर। हाउ सिक्योर वर द फाउंडेशंस ऑफ द ज़ारेस्ट रिजीम 13 से 14 तक अब आ गए हैं, ठीक है, तो पिछले सारा एरिया हम कवर कर रहे हैं, ठीक है, आसान चैप्टर है ना। 1913 रेमन ऑफ सेलिब्रेशंस, big celebrations and paint Petersburg was Moscow to show Tsar's unity with people. Nicholas II appeared publicly and toured Russia first time since 1905. Nicholas thought rule was stronger than ever. Actually, mainly propaganda, hiding unrest under the surface. Dumas offended, sealed at the back at Thanksgiving. Dumas offended, Seated at the back at Thanksgiving service, Serena's image not improved, left events early, looked strained, seemed haughty, real reason worried about son Alexei's health. What still supported the Tsar? Loyalty of the historian institution, state officials, Orthodox Church. Army loyalty helped Tsar survive 1905. On the eve of World War I, Russian army largest in Europe. Weaknesses inside the armed forces. Many soldiers reluctant to fire on workers. Soldiers were from poor families too. Army unity depended on harsh discipline plus parades, paradomonia. Army not modernized in weapons tactics. Navy loyalty under Potemkin community showed it couldn't be taken for granted. ठीक है. Army unity depended on harsh discipline and parades. Okay, repression after 1905. Repression preserved Tsarist power in the short term, did not make the regime secure long term because it didn't fix the fundamental causes of unrest. While some groups backed the regime, upper middle class feared revolutionary extremism. क्या है मिडिल क्लासेस जो थी feared revolutionary extremism, supported regime for order. ठीक है तो इम्पोर्टेंट है रेवोल्यूशनरी एक्सट्रीमिज्म. ठीक है मिडिल क्लास फियर करती थी. रूलर जेंट्री प्रॉपर्टी ओनर्स बिकम मोर कंजर्वेटिव after 1905 violence. Nobles blocked still open local government reforms. Reforms would increase peasant representation in Zemtvos, would challenge the aristocratic control of countryside. Even liberal cadets rallied to regime because they feared workers' violence, not because they supported real reform. Cadet leader Pavel Melyakov later supported government patriotically when war began. ठीक है तो कैडेट का लीडर जो था पेवल मेलियाकोव इसने मदद की थी. नेशनलिज्म प्लस एंडलेस एंटीसेमिटिज्म यूज्ड बाय regime. Regime promoted Russian revolution, Russian nationality before World War One. Tsar approved extreme right groups, the Union of the Russian People. They organized black hundreds, violent gang attacking democracy supporters, main victims Jews. यूनियंस ऑफ द रशियन पीपल बनाई और उसने उन लोगों ने ब्लैक हंड्रेड्स बनाए और आगे से ज्यूज़ को मारना स्टार्ट कर दिया. एंटीसेमिटिज्म वाइड स्प्रेड कंजर्वेटिव क्लेम्ड ज्यूज़ वर लिंक्ड टू लेफ्ट विंग. यूज prejudice to unite patriotic Russians behind Tsar with the help of police. Shows regime rallied on backward looking divisive tactics even while supposedly moving towards parliament. Again, shows regime rallied on backward looking decisive action even while supposedly moving towards parliament. तो ये जा रहे हैं Tsar and his family on 300th anniversary celebration for the Romanov dynasty in 1913. ये है Tsar. ठीक है ये है Serena. Okay, the photograph is useful for showing the Tsarist regime wished to present herself popular, stable, and reverse, but it's not a reliable evidence of genuine widespread popular support for the regime. आगे है हाउ स्ट्रॉन्ग वॉज द ऑपोजिशन टू द Tsarist regime 9 से 14 के बीच. स्ट्रेंथ ऑफ ऑपोजिशन. इंडस्ट्रियल अनरेस्ट increased due to lower wages, poor housing, squalid housing, basically the harsh working conditions. Strike became more frequent. Factory and shop workers, railway workers, university students, sailors in the navy. Violent repression. Lena Goldfield's massacre बड़ा important था. 270 miners were killed. Increased anger rather than loyalty. Peasant unrest continued. Many could not repay loans to the peasant land bank. Living conditions were often felt worse than before reforms. आगे है radical ideologies gained support. Revolutionary leaders Lenin continued organizing from exile. Censorship was evaded. Illegal pamphlet and newspaper circulated widely. Opposition created a tense confrontational atmosphere in society. ठीक है तो censorship was evaded यानी censorship was prevented और illegal pamphlet और newspaper ने circulate किया widely. Weakness of the opposition. Opposition groups were divided. Worker, peasant, liberals, socialists had different aims. Liberals were weakened. Many accepted limited reforms and feared working class violence. The regime successfully bought off moderates. Bolsheviks were infiltrated by Okharna. Raman Malinovsky, Bolshevik leader in the Duma, was a police spy. Very important. दोबारा पढ़ें. लिखा हुआ बोल्शेविक्स वर इनफिल्ट्रेटेड बाय द खंडा यानी पुलिस मेंबर्स बोल्शेविक्स में थे. क्यों? क्योंकि बोल्शेविक जो लीडर था इन द डूमा, ठीक है, वॉज अ पुलिस बाय, क्या नाम था, रोमन मेलिनोवस्की, ठीक है, रोमन मेलिनोवस्की. Police and army contained radical activity even if they could not eliminate it. Police and army contained radical activity even though they could not eliminate it. No unified leadership or coordinated action. The Duma it dissolved itself at the outbreak of war, ending political opposition. The opposition was widespread but not strong enough to overthrow the Tsar before 1914. It caused instability and tension, but lack of unity and effective repression prevented revolution. Only World War One later it created problems that allowed the opposition to succeed. ठीक है, उसका क्या नाम था, एक मिनट, इसका नाम है रोमन मेलिनोवस्की. उसका क्या नाम था, वो जो यूनियन ऑफ द 100 पीपल, ब्लैक 100, पेवल मिलियाकोव, सही. ये पेवल मिलियाकोव है कैडेट का लीडर, और जो पुलिस अखड़ना का आया था, क्या नाम है, बोल्शेविक्स का पार्ट था, वो है पेवल मलियाकोव. ये रोमन मेलिनोवस्की है, ठीक है. ओके, आगे है ओवरऑल जजमेंट. द अपोजिशन वाज वाइटेड बट नॉट स्ट्रॉन्ग इनफ टू ओवरथ्रो द it caused instability and tension, but lack of unity and effective repression prevented revolution. Only World War later condition that follows. सही हो गया. लिखा हुआ जी, स्ट्रेंथ ऑफ द रशियाज ट्रेडिशनल इंस्टीट्यूशन, लॉयल. अच्छा, एविडेंस दैट द ज़ारिस्ट regime faced challenges by 1914. आगे एविडेंस दैट द regime was still secure in 1914. Okay. The loyalty wasn't guaranteed. Some soldiers were reluctant to fire on workers. 1905 Potemkin Mutiny showed the naval could rebel. State official Orthodox Church state loyal regime could still rely on army discipline and the machinery of government. Duma had limited power. Tsar could ignore it. The members were often insulted, for example, treated as unimportant in ceremonies. Moderate liberals were bought off by the limited reforms. Duma politics reduced pressure for full revolution. At war outbreak, the Duma voluntarily dissolved to support national unity. आगे rapid industrialization created worse working conditions, poor housing and low wages, more strikes. Industrialization also brought economic growth and a sense of progress. Not all economic change automatically meant revolution. Many peasants struggled. Those who could bought land often couldn't repay loan. Areas to be the peasant land bank increased. Reforms created more prosperous peasants who had a stake in stability and were less likely to support revolution. 1913 celebrations were partially propaganda. Unrest existed below the surface. Tsarina seen aloof, harming the image of monarchy. Large public ceremonies showed the regime could still create visible loyalty. Conservative nationalism could rally support. Rising strike in Lena Goldfield massacres escalated anger. Marxism spread. Illegal literature circulated. Radical organized from exiles. Opposition was divided. Okarna inflated. Melinovsky was a spy. सही हो गया. The national unity shown before 1914 was misleading. The Tsarist regime was not committed to real reform. Nicholas II did not back reformers who tried to modernize Russia. The Tsarist public image was badly damaged. Stability after this was maintained mostly by the fear of state, not genuine loyalty. Historians view Marxist or yeah, traditionalist Soviet interpretation. The fall of Tsarism and the Bolshevik victory were inevitable based on Marxist theory. Russia was fragile with deep internal tensions. The state was being destabilized from within. World War I triggered collapse. Russia was mostly stable, economy was improving, government could control dissent. The monarchy might have survived if not for the catastrophe of the World War One. Russia before was not inevitable revolutionary but was unstable and dependent on repression, and the World War One turned that fragility into collapse. सही है. आई थिंक 4.2 4.3 हम ये कल 3 टॉपिक एक साथ कवर कर लेंगे, सही. और फिर परसों आपका फ्रांस हो जाएगा. फिर इसका एक कंप्लीट मैं पेपर सॉल्व करूँगा और फिर मैं उसको अपलोड करूँगा, उसके साथ हम डिस्कस करेंगे. ठीक है सर, अल्लाह हाफिज़.